So hello and welcome to today's SMERTS webinar, the Early Career Researcher Journey. My name is Alison Schneider and I'm the Education Coordinator at AgeWell, Canada's Aging and Technology Network. We are happy to host this SMERTS session for HQP across NCEs to discuss how 4 of AgeWell's early career researchers have navigated their way to a tenure track position. So before I turn things over to our panel, please be aware that this event is being recorded and will be posted on the AgeWell website. And I'll put that website in the chat if you're not familiar with AgeWell. We will start with a 30-minute panel discussion, followed by 20 minutes to answer questions from the audience. You may post and upvote questions in the Q&A tab. Now, please let me introduce our panelists. We have Dr. Nicole Dahmer, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Health, Aging and Society at McMaster University. With a background in library and information science, Nicole's SSHRC and AgeWell funded work resides at the intersection of information and care. We also have Dr. Shaital Desai. She's an assistant professor in interaction design and heads social and technological systems, or SATS lab at York University. Her research focuses on adaptive assistive technologies for people with accessibility needs, such as older adults, persons with impairments, and children. We have Dr. Taylor Cleworth joining us from the School of Kinesiology and Health Science at York University. He started as an assistant professor there in 2019. He received his PhD in kinesiology in 2018 from the University of British Columbia, then moved on to the University of Waterloo as a postdoctoral fellow. He researches falling risk in older adults who are residing in long-term care and retirement facilities. And finally, we have Dr. Vicky Commissar, who will begin as assistant professor in mechanical engineering at the University of British Columbia, Okanagan in January 2021. She completed her PhD in biomedical engineering in 2018 at the University of Toronto and Toronto Rehabilitation Institute, followed by a postdoctoral fellowship in kinesiology at Simon Fraser University. So Vicky will be moderating our discussion as well as acting as a panelist. So without further ado, I will turn things over to Dr. Vicky Commissar.
Okay, thank you very much, Alison, for the introduction. Thank you, AgeWell, for inviting us all to be here. And thank you, audience, for attending. I'm looking forward to about an hour, very exciting discussion. So our first question for our panelists is, what was your path to a tenure track position and how did you find your path? And we'll start with Nicole.
Okay, maybe it's helpful that I'm going first because I think my answer might be a bit more of an eagle eyes view, so maybe it'll narrow in as we move along the panelists. So as I reflected on this question, I must say that the path became clear looking back now. My path to a tenure track position, I think, actually started quite early on in my PhD. I'm finding now that, or maybe this has always been the case, but I'm finding that the PhD is increasingly this kind of delicate or curious balance between, you know, the traditional really precious intellectual work, but also obtaining this balance with professional preparation. So thinking about networking and thinking about relationship nurturing. So my path towards my current tenure track position that just started this July, it started during my PhD, I think, because I aim to strike a balance between this intellectual work and this professional preparation. And it was born out of a variety of different elements. So thinking about conference attendance, grant or scholarship applications, publications, and networking. And I think because my research is quite interdisciplinary, as it sounds like it is for many of the panelists here, a key point in my winding, sometimes seemingly never-ending path to my tenure track position was landing a postdoc in a department outside of my PhD home. So my PhD was in the Faculty of Information and Media Studies, and my first postdoc was at Trent University in the Department of Sociology, under kind of a broad aging umbrella. And so this first postdoc was really key in opening up new research opportunities and new relationships that kind of traced to a second postdoc at McMaster University, which led, I think, to my current tenure track position. I'll maybe stop there and let others maybe chime in and we can see what happens.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. Taylor's smiling. Would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. I mean, my path sort of had similar approaches in that I wanted to get at least, mine was after my PhD. I wanted to get this industry and academic perspective, which sort of opened the door for wherever it led me to. So I'll start way back in my master's. I was having the greatest time. Right near the end, I had a tough time actually completing it. And so it led to a 2-year gap between my master's and my PhD, where I was actually able to work as a lab tech. Working as a lab tech, I realized I really wanted to do more my own work instead of working only with other individuals. So went into my PhD, which was all at the University of British Columbia. And then when I was finishing my PhD, the supervisor asks, well, what do you want to do now? Where's it gonna take you? So that's when this was in my 4th year, I really started looking in at postdocs. And I was able to land one, like Nicole said, outside of my PhD stream. So I was involved in psychological components of balance control, as well as sort of core motor control components. And then I shifted gears into this epidemiological as well as biomechanics perspective on fall risk with older adults, working with Andrew Lang, who Vicky's very familiar with. In my postdoc, I was actually able to apply instantly to a number of positions, which was what my supervisor at the time almost made me do. And with those applications, I was able to actually get a few different opportunities in the first year of my postdoc. So, the path wasn't really set from my master's. It sort of developed as I went. And all I knew is that coming out of my PhD, I really wanted to get the perspective from both industry and academia. But I'll sort of keep it there and pass it on.
Okay, thank you, Taylor. Sheetal, would you like to elaborate on your path to tenure track?
Okay, so thanks, Vicky. I think my path was a bit different than Nicole's and Taylor's probably, for multiple reasons. Firstly, I did my PhD after working in the industry for many years, like probably 20, 25 years in the industry. And I worked in robotics and then moved to social robotics, and then started looking at human-centered design and interaction design in my PhD. And I had kept my options open in terms of whether I want to get into academia or industry. And my first preference was get back to industry. And I also came to Canada from Australia. So I did my PhD in Australia. I was well set, I'm going to spend all my life working in Australia somewhere, and suddenly a visiting a researcher from Canada who was collaborating with my supervisor, she offered me a postdoc position. And I said, oh, I'm too old for a postdoc. They're all young people around me. I wouldn't want to do a postdoc. But she convinced me for a year while she was there. So we packed our bags with my family and a dog and came to Canada in the middle of a snowstorm. And I said, oh, I've never seen snow in my life. I come from Queensland, which is warm the entire year. And oh, what did I sign up for? And I did my postdoc. I was working with children in my research and changed tracks and started looking into older adults, and mapping the accessibility and accessible design and inclusive design across the demographic scale was very interesting. And AgeWell was very instrumental in introducing a lot of technical multidisciplinary approaches to research and design. Many multidisciplinary collaborations were very important. And the concept of tenure track was very new to me, because there's no concept of tenure track in Australia. So we don't have tenure track positions in Australia. So the concept was very new to me. And then there was this, when I was exploring industry positions, most of them were in the US. And I was not in a position to move my family again from Canada to US. So there were personal limitations. and barriers. So I started looking for, academic positions in Canada. And the next barrier was that, I don't have a Canadian residency. So I don't know how many participants or how many attendees are here who are on a work permit or a student permit, or student visa. But the chances of getting a tenure track position in Canada, if you do not have a Canadian residency or a citizenship, is very difficult. I saw this position at York University. I applied and I got it. So, so that's a bit like up and down kind of a path. I didn't have any strategy as such. Taylor and Nicole, I think, had a very clear strategy. So I think I'll stop at that.
Okay, thank you, Sheetal. I don't have a lot to add to that, but I'll maybe bring in a perspective from the people with engineering backgrounds, because our disciplines are different here. So I think similar to Taylor and Sheetal, I didn't really have a clear sense of where I wanted to, or what I wanted to do with my PhD. When I got started, for me, it was more a way of pivoting disciplines. My undergrad was very chemical engineering focused, and I didn't really like playing with cells for a living. So biomechanics was kind of the path out of that. To me, my thesis was this pain in the arse thing that I had to do that distracted from my side industry pursuits, and that distracted from knowledge translation that actually really interested me. I probably wasn't until toward the end of my PhD, which dragged on for a while because I didn't, have a lot of focus in it, that I started publishing. I started a postdoc with one publication. It's a wonder I even got anything. I was able to land a postdoc in a different discipline on paper, but still kind of in the same biomedical engineering, kinesiology area. And it honestly probably wasn't until the second year of that I felt that I was competitive for a tenure track position, and that it was actually something that was worth taking the time to apply for. And apart from that, I was still pretty heavily involved in industry projects and in policy projects. And when it came down to the interviews, those became actually really instrumental in spinning a credible funding strategy that ultimately landed me the job. But it really wasn't until, we're talking a year and a half ago that I started to apply seriously for these things. So I'll stop with that, and we'll move on to our next question. So the next question is, who were your allies and what were your guiding principles in your decision to, I guess, go for the tenure track or to continue or persist on the path toward that? And we will start with Taylor, please.
Ooh, sure. So when I was first reading this question, I really had to think if I had any guiding principles that, that I really took to heart when going from the, grad school days all the way up to assistant professor. And I think the only thing that really sticks out is the fact that, not only like put your head down and get your own work done, but, don't be afraid to branch outside of your own little bubble. It's, I'll talk about this in some of the other questions, but one of the things that really made me love the research was getting to know what everyone else was doing as well, not just pigeonholing my thesis and knowing exactly what I need to do. Excuse me. And in terms of my allies, I mean, this built from a network that started in my master's, and getting to know what everyone else is doing. Then you get to, build these collaborations. And in fact, one partnership that I had in my master's, I've actually kept to all the way up, and we were from different labs, different streams, and they're now over on the West Coast, but we've recently joined to form a new collaboration, and that would never have happened if I had stuck with my, do my thesis and only my thesis, and there's nothing else in the world that matters. So, a guiding principle is don't be afraid to get outside that shell, outside of that bubble.
Okay, thank you, Taylor. Sheetal, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, thanks, Vicky. I would echo the same thing as what Taylor was mentioning. The institutes and organizations where you do your PhD and postdoc and people associated with those organizations play a very important role in driving you in your future career, whether it is tenure track or industry or whatever you do. My supervisors, my PhD supervisor, if we are allowed to take names, Thea Blackler and Arlene Estel was my postdoc supervisor, and Deborah Fells was my postdoc supervisor as well. They played a big role in, in creating these collaborations around you. If you may try and network, but no one knows you. So if you have those, your supervisors, you can say holding your hand at some times, but guiding you in terms of, where to collaborate and how to collaborate, and even having those names along with you makes a huge difference. Your guiding principles, you are not alone. This is such a lonely journey. Trust me, I see Nicole nodding her head. It is so lonely. It is sometimes, like when you're doing a PhD, you cry. And for many reasons, even when you're happy, you cry. And when I got my PhD, I cried literally. I don't know why I was crying, but it's a lonely journey, but you're not alone in this. There are all these invisible supporters around you. So it is very important to recognize, who are those support systems around you. Supervisors, supervisors connected to your supervisors, you never know. So tap on those resources. I think that will be very useful in terms of, building your career. And those support systems last with you forever. Even when you are doing your tenure track, they are still with you. So trust in that support system around you.
Awesome. Thank you, Sheetal. Nicole, would you like to add to that?
Sure. I think I'll keep this pretty short. I think my experiences mirror what's been stated so far. I think just really, I think I can't overstate the value and the immense gift of having kind of supportive, attentive supervisors or allies or mentors. I think I've been really fortunate to grow and learn from and learn with so many, and not only my truly amazing PhD and postdoc supervisors, but different, like I think like Sheetal was mentioning, but as I've really benefited as well from the relationships that have developed even out of affiliations with different, aging related centers. So I'm thinking at Trent, they have the Trent Center for Aging and Society, and I was able to meet a variety of different individuals there. And you never know where those relationships might take you, but they do really linger with you. And I've been impressed and really so humbled, I think, by people's willingness to stay in touch and help out whenever they're able. And that might mean sometimes even sending a kind email with, a grant opportunity or a neat project coming up or something like that. So I think you never know where some of those relationships might take you. As cheesy as that sounds, I think there's some truth to it.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. I don't have a lot to add to this. I think we've heard about the importance about building relationships, maintaining relationships as important to getting through. I only have 2 comments to this. The first is just amusing in that as I'm trying to bring my equipment grants together, I've been harassing Taylor's PhD and postdoc supervisors regarding their perturbation platform expertise. So they're probably sick of me, but here we are. I think the only other guiding principle that hasn't been stated is when I was going for jobs, I didn't apply for anything where there was 0 chance that I'd ever want the job or to live in the city where the job was situated, should I be offered it. Not everyone agrees with that approach. There can be benefit in practicing. For me, it was really important to focus my applications on positions that I actually wanted to take, and as opposed to letting the prestige of the position cloud my judgment as to whether I wanted to actually work in that area. Okay, our third question is, how did you, quote unquote, know that it was going to work out? Did you ever think of giving up? What was the toughest challenge of the process and how did you overcome it? So we will start with Sheetal for this one.
I would say the toughest challenge for me was, and probably it's very unique again, because I didn't know the Canadian system at all. So it was learning from the scratch, creating those networks within Canada. I did a lot of networking, but I ended up with a job with, without using those networks. So I didn't know anyone when I got this job at York University. I didn't know anyone at York University. So the challenges, I guess, are knowing what you should do. The tenure track, like for example, when you go for the interviews, what should you expect? How should you, what you should, even the concept that you can negotiate your salary and things like that is completely new, because in Australia, we don't negotiate. You have a range that very specific to certain scales that you apply for. So that concept was very new. So again, I would tap on my allies again to know what, how the system works. How did I know whether it is going to know? I didn't know it is going to work. I didn't know what challenges, what I'm signing up for exactly. I'd heard the horror stories of academia, and I wasn't sure if I'm good enough for academia. But I did sign up, and I have to say I'm happy because I have really supportive colleagues around me, so I'm not complaining. But yeah, I'll let Taylor and Nicole add to that what their experience has been.
Okay, thank you, Sheetal. Nicole, would you like to add to this?
Sure. When I read the question, how did I know it was going to work out? I was talking to my spouse and I said, I had no idea it was going to work out until I received the phone call from the chair offering me the position. I think, in retrospect, it's hard to know that it's going to work out, because while you're doing your absolute best and you're preparing as best you can for the interview and for your job talk, at the same time, I've now come to understand that there are so many decisions related to your potential hire, each at the department level, at the faculty level, at the university level, that might have that are very much outside of your control in a way that might be dictating whether or not you're hired. So I think learning to, this might not be so related to the question, but I think understanding that there are potentially many factors, I guess, about the position for which you're interviewing that might be completely outside of your control, might be a bit liberating in a way. And so all you can do as you're preparing is to do your very best. I practiced like mad for my job talk. I practiced with so many different people. So yes, I didn't know it was going to work out. I didn't ever think of giving up. I did think about whether or not I might just continue as a postdoc as long as I possibly could for a while, because I really, really relished my time as a postdoc. I thought it was the dreamiest kind of position. And I think the toughest challenge of the process, I think, to be honest, it's as general as just the job market being so nutty and seemingly sometimes insurmountable in a way. That was just, I think, a mental roadblock sometimes trying to get around.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. Taylor, would you like to add to this?
Yeah, I'm going to echo. I absolutely had no idea that it was going to work out for me. And there was definitely a time where I thought of giving up about academia. Like I said, after my master's, I was done. I really didn't look forward to going back into the lab, trying to answer a new question. It wasn't until a year I was outside of academia that it really pulled me back. So, that was probably one of the toughest challenges that I had. And it was the early days. I was fresh I went from Ontario to BC, not quite Australia to Canada, but it was a big change. And at the beginning of my master's, loved it and not so much. But then my PhD, I loved every minute of it from start to finish. Postdoc, same thing, and now into the position. So, some of the other challenges is the stress and frustrations you get when going through a thesis. It's come up a few times already today, and you're not the only one. These things are not easy to do, and if they were, everyone would do them. So, stick with it and don't shy away from asking for help. There's all kinds of individuals at your institution or from past colleagues, and that goes right up to even when you're in the professor position. So. Yeah, the way I sort of get around things is often asking for help or asking for at least advice on how to do something.
Okay, thank you, Taylor. I would echo all of the comments here, and especially with respect to asking for help. I know shortly after I was accepted the position, Taylor was actually one of my phone calls over how on earth do I get started. I think the only thing that might be a bit unique about my experience is that my interview for the job that I ultimately accepted took place 2 days before everything shut down due to the pandemic. When that happened, I know there were 2 other positions that I had applied for, and I received letters from both of those that said, oh, we're actually not going to run these. So I was kind of walking into I was in the middle of a market that had effectively collapsed with the pandemic. So yeah, it did create a fair bit of uncertainty in the process. There was a multi-month gap essentially between my verbal offer and written one, because it's hard to predict, what budgets are going to look like in the future, and people are absorbed in other things. I think it's a tough reality of the situation now, and I don't have a good solution to it, but I will say that, yeah, it was a challenge not knowing what was going to happen. And I think I really just kind of tried to work through it and lean on my support network to make it through. Okay, the next question kind of builds on this. So recognizing the challenge of the job market right now, do you have any advice or words of wisdom? So we'll start with Nicole.
Sure. I think in answering this, I think my advice will be short and sweet here. And I also, in answering this question, I feel like I'm now speaking from quite a position of privilege. I think my answer really speaks back to what I might have mentioned in my answer to the first question. I think the kind of tightness in the market really underscores or highlights a need to be aware to a degree, I guess, of what you want to get out of your PhD. And of course, things might change, but if you have an idea of what you'd like to do post PhD, I think you can be working quite strategically throughout your PhD to build towards what you hope to do. It's hard. I don't know. It's also just a really hard market, so it's hard sometimes to give helpful advice. But I think also building on what we've already been talking about is also, Taylor and Sheetal, we've all been talking about kind of the relationships and mentorship that we've all, it sounds like, benefited immensely from too. So I think my advice is also to lean on others. And I think Sheetal said it so beautifully. I think trusting in your network of support in a way, or your support network too, that you'll be able to speak to them and learn from them as well.
Hey, thank you, Nicole. Taylor, would you like to add to this?
Yeah, when we were first came on today and started chatting, I was saying, if anyone has an answer to this question, please let me know, because this is a tough one. And the only thing I can say, because going through it myself, is, don't just sit back and wait for the research and life to get back and going, or get back up and running. Sort of keep going with your momentum. Try and complete the things you can. Don't just sit there and wait. It's the only real thing I can say or advice I have. Yeah, that's really all I can say.
Okay, thank you, Taylor. Sheetal.
Okay, so advice, the favorite topic of mine, probably. Actually, the advice depends upon what stage you are at in terms of your PhD, postdoc, or, are you looking for work at the moment? We're still not seeing that dip in the number of tenure track positions advertised, during pandemic. But you always speculate and see what is going to happen 1 year down the line. Or right now we have funds and money poured in by the government, but at some stage it may stop. Universities are looking at budget cuts globally. How is it going to affect the number of jobs available 1 year, 2 years down the line, depending upon when you're going to graduate, if you're doing a PhD, or if you're looking for a job at the moment. So where does your skill lie? Remember, it's not only your PhD thesis or postdoc, but there are some transferable skills that you should focus on and speak aloud even when you're going for interviews. I tapped on a lot on my transferable skills. I did a lot of teaching when I was doing my PhD, so which gave me a lot of exposure to other disciplines or other topics or areas other than my PhD thesis. Remember, I come from engineering. I did my PhD in design, so the teaching allowed me to learn a lot about design, which I'm teaching now. So, which is interesting. Being an engineer teaching in design is a weird combination. So in summary, what I'm trying to say is, explore areas which could be the future in terms of being employable, especially in tenure track. If you are applying for a job, research that department really well. Why are they looking for this position to be filled? If it is a tenure track position, then they are looking for someone really critical for that particular position. They are in real urgent need to fill that position. Otherwise, tenure track is a very expensive deal for the universities. They're not going to invest in anyone. They just walks through the door. So you are going to play a very important role in that position. Find out what that role is. Usually for this tenure track positions, you have 3 or 4 rounds of interviews and presentations and stuff, interviews with deans, and it's a long process. First interview when you have with the department, feel free to ask questions. In my experience, people don't ask questions in an interview thinking it's just a one-way traffic, but ask a lot of questions about the department. Feel free to be very open. Committees love people who are open. Collegial, they don't like people who are arrogant. So I have been on search committees as well. Last 1 year, I have been at York University, and I know that departments, they want someone who is skilled, who is good at their work, who is good at teaching and research and services. But the first important thing they see in a candidate is that person going to fit in the culture of that particular department? Is that person going to be collegial? So ask questions, but sound collegial, sound humble, sound inquisitive, curious, but not arrogant. I'm not saying everyone is arrogant, but just practice the style of communication. I think that's very important to strike that first impression. And then at different stages you are interviewed by different people, and you should practice or understand how do you communicate with the dean, or how do you communicate with the department chair. The communication levels are different. The way you talk is very different. And I think in addition to your skills and your experience, the communication aspect turns out very important. Sorry, I'm talking a lot, but I'll let Vicky add more to it.
Okay, thank you, Sheetal. I think we've raised some excellent points to this question. Similar to Taylor, I actually don't have a good answer to give advice that's going to magically open up a lot of positions. One thing that I did that eased a lot of pressure off of my applications was I also had parallel applications to non-academic positions. So I actually while I was applying for academic jobs, I also was applying to government positions. So there was one with the National Research Council of Canada on their building code committee, and that focused on, it was essentially the other side of the table that used a lot of my PhD research in making policy decisions. So what it meant was that, you know, when the pandemic hit and a lot of positions just didn't materialize, I was still able to kind of approach the ones that were still on the table with a pretty clear head, knowing that there was a backup plan if those didn't work out. Okay, so I'm seeing that we're looking to start the audience Q&A soon. We do have one last question on the list here, so I'll maybe ask it, and if you guys want to give like your 1 or 2 sentence response, we'll then move on. So the last question is, how did you make your academic applications competitive? What's the best way to proceed in the interview and negotiations? So we'll start with Taylor.
Yeah, and I mean, again, this answer stems from some things that have already been said. One of them is really, you know, selling yourself to the needs of the department and making yourself readily available, or making yourself, you know, an ideal individual to be in that institute. You know, don't sell yourself short on a number of aspects that they're really looking for. The best way to proceed in the interview and negotiations, you know, that was a tough one, because, you know, you get this offer, you're really excited, you know, you don't really know if there's anywhere to go other than, you know, I'm so happy I got the offer and I don't really need anything else. But take your advice from your mentors and reach out again to not only individuals in your network, but, you know, see if you can get a hold of individuals at the institute that you're going to, and really see if, you know, where you can take things, whether it be lab space or salary or whatever it is. But yeah, listen to others and yeah, focus on what they need, not just what or who you are.
Okay, thank you, Taylor. Sheetal, do you have anything to add to this?
I think I've mentioned about the preparing for the interview, research the department needs and requirements. Another thing is prepare really good references in your application. So when you have to supply 2 or 3 references with your application, make sure you have really good references. Most of these references are sent, the reference letters are sent directly from the referees. So make sure you give names of people who can write really good reference letters for you. It makes a whole lot difference. And I realized this when I was on the search committee. When you're negotiating, negotiate. I had 3 or 4 rounds of negotiations with the dean before I really signed up, saying, okay, this is the deal. It is odd when you're going for your first job, but if you are at that position where you are, you know, where an offer is placed to you, that means they really need you, and you can negotiate. You know, look up on Sunshine List. Taylor and Nicole can tell more about that. But there is a website where all the salaries at that particular university are listed. Look up what is the salary trend for that particular position, and look for recent appointments. Don't look at appointments who are like 10 or 5, even 5 years ago. And negotiate accordingly. Talk to your allies again. What is a good salary? I remember I talked to my supervisors for advice. Another thing is, until and unless you don't sign that final agreement, don't tell everyone that you are going through these interviews. I don't know, I see people smiling, but yeah, don't tell everyone, don't tell many people that you're going through this process for many different reasons. And I'll keep quiet over there.
Okay, thank you, Sheetal. Nicole, would you like to add to this?
Sure, I'll try and keep this really brief. I think when you're proceeding with the interview, I think it's important to remember that it's an interview happening almost in kind of a bi-directional interview. You are interviewing for a tenure track position, which means it's potentially a long-term, decades-long relationship. So it's an investment on, I think, on both parties. So while they're interviewing you, I think it's also important to be thinking about your fit within the department as well. So I think that speaks, as Sheetal was saying, the need to really be yourself, and to approach it with an inquisitive, I think, sense. And in terms of negotiations, agreeing with what Sheetal said too, one tip I found really helpful was that I was able to reach out to the faculty association at McMaster, and they were really helpful and forthcoming with some strategies and some key, information about different kind of salary ranges for each faculty on campus as well. So that was really crucial.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. So we'll now move on to the audience questions. So the first one on the list here is most attendees here are part of NCEs or other large research networks. How do or did you leverage your participation in these networks? Would any of you like to speak to this? Okay, Taylor.
I can say something just to get it started. I mean, the one thing is don't hide the fact that you're a part of these large-scale institutes or organizations, but don't oversell it in the fact that you've started these things either. So say that you were a part of this organization. This is what you've learned from it, and this is what you also bring to the institute. It could be that you're affiliated with something that they're really looking for at the institute. So again, it's meets the needs of what they're doing. It also talks to about the work that you're doing. So certainly don't shy away from it.
Okay, thank you, Taylor. Sheetal, I see that you've unmuted yourself. Do you want to add to this?
I don't know, when you are say a part of an organization such as AgeWell, one thing is very important is that you participate in a lot of these activities, but also look up at your university where there are events and activities. One thing which I strategically did was do a lot of interdisciplinary collaborations, and AgeWell allowed me to do a lot of this multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary collaborations, talk to a lot of people from other disciplines, because when you are in a tenure track position, or even when you're going for interviews, when the committee sees that you are able to talk in other disciplines language as well, you become more employable as well, because if they have someone who can bridge the gap between, or make the connections between the faculties, you become very employable and desirable in certain positions. So yeah.
Okay, thank you, Sheetal. Nicole, do you have anything to add to this?
I think just to echo, I was at an AgeWell conference and someone had just presented an interesting paper, and I went up. I think it was Jen Boger. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her last name correctly, but just building that relationship, we've been able, to write a paper together now. So I think in addition to different grants that these like AgeWell can afford you, that builds your CV, and I find grants allow you to get more grants. I think also relationship building again within these different organizations is key for mentorship opportunities, but as well as something as practical as publications as well.
Yeah, thank you. I think the only thing that I have to add to this is from a hireability perspective, because the mandate of a lot of these networks involves a lot of cross-sectoral work. So this includes work with industry, work with government. Those were the experience that I got in working with that and building relationships through that was key for putting forward a credible research plan and funding strategy when it came time for me to sell myself to universities. With Tri-Council funding being so hard to secure these days, it's good to have other avenues to support your program. And I found my involvement in AgeWell was really important for showing that I had relationships and a vision for making that happen. Okay, the next question that's been upvoted a few times. What would be your top tips for putting together a teaching or research portfolio? Would anyone like to handle this? I think we'll maybe focus on the teaching one because that is one where there's a lot less guidance, I would say, given up until you reach faculty and even there.
It's a really good question. I'll take a stab and hope that my fellow panelists will chime in with their insights as well. Again, not to keep harking on it, but I circulated my research and teaching portfolios to a number of my mentors, my PhD supervisor, my postdoc supervisors, to have a look at them. I think it's important to really make the information clear. So my teaching portfolio, for example, it listed the classes that I've taught in a table format. You know, I put some key student evaluation, both qualitative kind of written feedback, as well as some scores that I got. I think that hiring committees are looking at so many applications. You want to make your different portfolio elements as easy to read, I think, as simple as that. So making the information easy to follow, consistent, having headers and things like that. And just presenting the information as clearly as possible, and making sure that you're kind of putting your strongest foot forward. So starting off with, you know, some great reviews, some high scores, for example, and then leading into maybe a teaching philosophy. And I found I had to do a lot of internet searching to also help me figure out what this was supposed to contain as well. And I think that's part of the process as well.
Yeah, I would add that, you know, it really helps to look at examples too. So often my mentors were open to me taking a look at how they wrote their research portfolios going into it. And it gave me an idea of how exactly I wanted to formulate mine, so that, yeah, it becomes essentially easy to read and easy to digest, because sometimes you get hiring committees looking at 60, 70 applicants, and it's just like a grant. They can't read every minute detail. So really getting them to struggle through a portfolio is going to be a tough sell.
Okay.
Yeah. Can I add a couple of things here? Sorry. So when it comes to research portfolio, highlight the main important things. Look in the advertisement, what they are looking for. So highlight those aspects in your research portfolio with respect to research. Highlight your ability to apply for grants, even if those grants are unsuccessful. At least mention that you've been actively looking for grants. In terms of teaching portfolio, give examples of your student achievements. So if you're saying that, oh, you were empathetic about pandemic situation or something in your teaching, give examples. How were you empathetic? If you taught something and you had some achievements, give again examples. If you use certain tools in your teaching, online teaching, give those examples. The search committee is always looking for examples as evidence rather than just giving a high level statement. Yeah, I guess, yeah, a couple of things I wanted to add. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sheetal. Yeah, I would agree with all of those important points. I think it's important to look at past examples. My only caution is that, especially with the teaching philosophy, it can be really easy to lose your voice. So as you're bringing that together, really reflect on who you actually are as an educator, and make sure that's consistent with the evidence that you're putting forward in your portfolio. And try to avoid jargon that doesn't actually mean anything. And I definitely went down that path when I started. Okay, our next question. I'm wondering if you can give some advice for what to say or what not to say in job interviews. Let's maybe say, if each of you could give one comment on what was good and one comment that you really should try to avoid.
When I'm going into my interview, I was told that, you know, there are some horror stories where individuals lost the job for just a few things that they had said or done during the interview. So while there are these examples, I don't really have any for you. But what I would say is, keep an open mind when you're in the interview and make sure that you do your homework going into it so you can speak to individuals on the hiring committee or in the institution about what you're going to bring when you come there, what you're going to do when you get there, not just this is what I've done in the past.
Okay. Sheetal, do you want to add to that?
One thing I would say is, as I've said earlier, be collegial, ask curious questions, try to sound interesting, that you're interested in the job, interested in the department, and show that you've done some research before. Never badmouth anyone within the department, outside the department. There will be tricky questions asked, try to get a sense of what are your relationship with your supervisor, for example. And, there may be, things like may not have worked with your colleagues in the previous employment. And it's nice to be honest, but don't badmouth someone. People understand that there are issues like you don't get along with everyone, but don't get to that stage where you have to say bad things about anyone, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I want to echo what was just said. Showing interest, it was told to me, don't just go there and act like, you deserve the job. And so you don't really show that much interest because you think you're going to get it no matter what. I mean, not common sense, but really show why you think you belong there and show that interest. Absolutely. That was a good point.
Yeah, I think just to really briefly build on that, like Taylor said, I researched what each kind of person on the hiring committee, what they were working on, some of their past publications, to be able to demonstrate that, I've taken care and time to look at this and how I see my work complementing, what they might have been doing, or for some possible avenues for future collaboration as well. And I think it's really just being yourself and being present at the interview is another key element. I think I looked up, there are a lot of kind of helpful websites you can find too that often list some, more likely than not questions that you'll be asked to. And I just had some time to think through how I might begin to approach those questions so that I had that kind of ready. So if I was a bit anxious, I could kind of draw on some pre-existing thinking to kind of lead me into the interview.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. I would definitely echo the importance of reviewing what the search committee does. So before my interview, I actually went onto Google Scholar and stalked their most recent publications, where I found that actually 2 members had completely pivoted from what was on their website to work that was actually highly relevant to where I was working in. So it reflected well on me that I could reference these publications that hit press, within the last 2 months. I also, for professors where there wasn't any real overlap, I proposed a course that we could collaborate on developing. So you can spin it toward teaching if the research fit doesn't feel like it's there. In terms of what not to say, I know the first interview that I really blew happened because I wasn't able to articulate a strong vision for not just the first few studies, but where those first few studies on my proposed team would lead, and that was a problem. I would also say that as you're showing interest when you pick your questions, frame those questions in a way that suggests that you're really trying to look toward building a career in the department, but also pick questions that make the search committee feel good about themselves. So ones that they'll be able to answer in a way that makes them feel positive. And I think that's especially important if you're coming from a very large institution that's very well funded to one that might not be as large as the one that you're applying from. Okay, the next question here. What makes a really good reference letter? Are there key things that hiring groups are looking for? I'll maybe direct that to Sheetal because I think she's been on a search committee to get started here.
So you don't write a reference letter. You just provide the names of the referees, and a confidential reference letter comes from the referees to the committee. My advice is that, choose your referees very carefully, probably talk to them beforehand and see if they are, able to provide a good reference letter. Another thing that came up on the search committee I was on was some of the letters were not on the letterheads of the institute. So, you could put in a word to your referee saying if they can provide a reference letter on a letterhead of the university or the organization. Yeah, I think, and then, what goes in the reference letter is not in your hands actually. So that's why what you can do is choose your referees very carefully.
Yeah.
Oh,
Go ahead, Nicole.
sorry, Taylor. I would say though, I think you can, I find as someone who is now writing reference letters, I find you can certainly hand your referee some material that they might want to include. You can make it really explicit and clear for your referee how you see yourself fitting in this department. You can include some facts about the department, what grants that you have that are especially relevant. So I think you can't, of course, dictate the content whatsoever, but you can have a hand in helping guide maybe the shape of it.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. You really want to give the individual enough ammo so that they can talk about you in the way that it speaks to the job. So not just giving them everything about you. Likely they're going to know a lot about your research history because they may be a supervisor or a mentor. But you also want to give them enough detail about the job or the position that you're applying for so that they can, again, speak to what the institute is looking for and whether or not you're a good fit. But that all comes down to choosing the right one, giving them the right information, and then sort of leaving it up to them.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I think we'll move on from that. The only thing that I'll maybe add is for those who might be in the position of having to write your own reference letters, one thing that I did or had seen in the past that was helpful was going through the application criteria as indicated on the posting, and then noting a few points that are framed in terms of the application criteria. So that was a strategy that we used for my applications. Okay, this next question is highly relevant to NCEs. How do you network? What kind of questions do you ask when trying to build this network?
I have one little bit. The first thing is to do your homework if you are actually interested in communicating with anybody in the network. So, conferences, workshops, a little tougher in today's day, but hopefully this will it'll change and we'll all get to be in person again. But really be able to speak to the work that the individual is doing and not just come out of the blue with these high-end questions that they have no idea who you are and where you're coming from. So, I mean, that's more on the communication one-on-one aspect, but yeah, the biggest thing is to not overwhelm them with things that they're not really expecting up front.
Yeah, awesome. Nicole, I saw you open your mouth earlier.
I suppose I really enjoy people, so I find networking quite an enjoyable exercise, and I know that's not really the case for everyone, but I find people are usually quite amenable to engaging in conversation. So for example, I think this question is coming from Vivienne, and I see they would like a kind of an example. So for example, an area that I'm looking to get into is kind of older adults and kind of sexual health and where they get information about. Well, this is it's a new area, but I'm really interested in it. So even on Twitter, for example, Sharon Hincliffe is really well known in this area. So I even just sent her, liked some tweets, followed, and when something relevant came up, I was able to send her a direct message, and now we're in email communication, and who knows where that might lead. So I find it's more difficult now. I think it was easier, like Taylor was saying, maybe, someone gives a conference paper and you're able to go up to them, you linger and loiter at the front as you do kind of awkwardly at the end of a conference session, and you go talk to them. It's kind of like meeting a famous person or something, or you're standing waiting for an autograph or something. But I think there are still opportunities now through, Twitter, for example, where you can send a message and, do your homework, as Taylor said, but also show interest. And I think when people are interested in your research, it's kind of those beautiful moments that you kind of take in and want to engage with people who show an interest in what you're thinking through and grappling with.
Okay, awesome. Sheetal, would you like to add to that?
I would echo the what Taylor and Nicole has said. But find your comfort level. You don't want to force yourself upon someone just for the sake of networking. If you're not comfortable, it's not going to work. So and you want to build a long-lasting relationship, So say, for example, you meet someone at a conference and you strike a conversation. Take it forward by sending an email or adding that person on LinkedIn or Twitter or something. And find ways where you can collaborate, probably writing a grant together. Or so you have to find, it's not just one moment interaction which leads to a network or networking. It is something which happens over a period of time. So find something which you are comfortable doing it. In my personal situation was like, when I was doing my PhD, a lot of my fellow PhD students would go out and socialize on a Friday evening and have a beer. And I couldn't do that because I had a very young daughter at that time. So you have barriers. So find things that work for you within those barriers, around those barriers.
Thank you, Sheetal. I think the only thing that I will add to that is, echoing Sheetal's point that networking is a very long-term process. You're not going to build like a 500-person network immediately. The biggest thing that I've learned through this is that my friends and buddies from way back in the day are now my partners, my collaborators, my colleagues. A lot of these things kind of tend to come out in the woodwork, right? As not only you progress through your career, but also your contemporaries do, right? So I think that part is important. I see Allison back on the screen here.
Yes, I just popped up. It's such a great discussion, but we have gone 5 minutes over. A lot of great outstanding questions, but I'm just hoping if we could do one last round just to summarize your takeaway for the HQP who are still here. We still have a number of people with us, even though we've gotten a few minutes over. So if we wouldn't mind doing that just to wrap up, and then we'll say goodbye.
Okay, thank you. So wrap up comments. Nicole, do you want to start?
Sure, super briefly. I think my brain has stopped functioning. I think that what I've taken away and what I think has rung through each of our experiences is the importance of nurturing existing relationships and not hesitating to kind of lean on our mentors for assistance. And then I think being open to building relationships as we're going through this strange journey and strange road of academia.
Okay, awesome. Taylor.
Yeah, I would say that, it's pretty clear that there is no recipe to getting the academic position. So, just because you're doing something different doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. But yeah, I echo what Nicole said, don't hesitate to reach out to individuals in your network or outside of your network. And, you're not recreating you're not creating the wheel here. So you feel free to piggyback of how it's been done in the past and then make it your own.
Okay, Sheetal.
Okay, so before I do the wrap up, there is a question which is specifically asking me, Deborah is asking me, why you shouldn't tell others you're applying to certain jobs. I was not referring to when you're applying. Yes, everyone that you're looking for work. But when you are going through the process of interviews, and it's a long process, it takes 6 months to sometimes a year before you actually get your job, the tenure track position that you've been interviewing for. During that process, I wouldn't publicize a lot that I'm going to probably get this job or something like that. Because it's a long process, you will feel very upset and if you don't get it. But the other thing is it's a very competitive thing. So this is a very competitive world. You will find a lot of people who would create barriers for you. So, and I've experienced that. So I'm telling you from my experience, when you're going through the interview process, the multiple stages of your interview process, tell your close connections, your supervisors, your referees, but don't publicize thinking that you're going to get the job. That is what I meant to say. About the wrap up, remember that tenure track is a means to a start of a career. It is not the end. So don't think that, oh, I've got this tenure track position, so now everything is going to be smooth sailing for me. The challenge starts after you get the tenure track position. Also, don't limit yourself in terms of, the only thing possible after a postdoc or a PhD is a tenure track position. There are many options available now for PhDs. So tap on those available options as well in your discipline. So it could be a research fellowship. You have a lot of PhDs now doing just research work instead of getting into and a teaching academia kind of traditional positions. You can get into an industry as well. Look for industry positions as well. I would advise keep your options open.
Yeah, thank you, Sheetal. Okay, so just I guess my last comment in closing, and I'll sort of address one other question that's still open here. I think it's really easy to get caught up in the application and publication arms race. Applications have become extremely competitive lately. We're now at the point where basically the sort of track record that would have gotten you a faculty position when our supervisors went through the process won't even get you a postdoc right now, or even a funded PhD. So I think it's really easy to lose sight of who you are and what you're all about. And just remember that you have so much to offer to the world, regardless of the outcome of your applications. Some will work great, others won't. Don't lose sight of who you are. Don't lose sight of what's important to you. Specific to the publication question, there is a point, I believe, of diminishing returns where, you'll hit a point where there's enough, but at that point, everything else becomes more important. But I think at the end of the day, it is a really tough process, and there's so much that's beyond your control. So, do your very best with it, but don't let it define who you are as a human, as an individual. So that wraps my point up.
Great, thank you so much. This has really been a exceptional panel, and I really thank all of you for taking the time to share your experience and expertise with us and our audience. I want to thank you for your questions. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all of them, but there will be future webinars, and hopefully we can address some of the application questions, because there's a lot of those coming up, so we can work on some of those skills as well. So thank you again for attending today. I really appreciate your time, and on behalf of Age Well, stay safe and happy holidays. Bye.
Take care.
Thank you.